Hello, I'm Dan Noyes, and I'm here to share with you a little novella I wrote over the last 3 years that's called The Sound of the Shadow of Her Hands. And the book is about a little orphan girl by the name of Olme. And Olme, since she cannot hear and has not been taught how to see the world, perceives things very differently, mythically and magically, and she puts together things that sometimes might seem ritualistic because she reveres and finds wonder in all things. And I wrote the book for one main reason, and that is to inspire wonderment and reverie in the world. So with that, I'd like to read to you from the book. I'll start out with a prelude. The spirit of humanity interconnects us all. Sometimes it takes a deaf orphan to help us understand that which is invisible is the most essential. Through Olme's journey and observation of life, we are left to see the back parts of God. Through the silence of Olme's world, we start to hear the shadows of her hands. And in this reading, I'll just be reading the first two chapters, which is the beginning chapter is staged in a town around us, and it's titled Issuing. The sound of the shadow of her hands. Since nothing that exists in the world of senses is everlasting, the loss of sense permeates towards eternity. Issuing. It was a quiet night on West 7th Street, and just outside the big white four-square house lay a somber girl. She was sprawled on the small grass patch just to the side of the front porch. She was trying to get comfortable and escape the heat by making her body contact as much of the cool grass as she could. She could sense the anticipation of dew on the underbelly of each blade of grass. She could hear the pitch of the wind tuned with the length of each grass stalk as it turned from a high, dry rustle and started to move down the scale to a low moan. The summer evening breeze was not only planting the seeds of anticipatory dew, but changing its song in the process. She could not lay flat on her stomach as she wished, but rather stretched the side of her body from arm over head to hip-twisted legs. The bulge was also restless tonight, squirming and kicking to the rhythm of the changing wind song. She missed her parents some, but not enough to write them every day as she had promised. There was too much anger and misunderstanding with her mother, and not enough bond with her father. They would see her soon enough, as the bulge was ripe and due towards the end of the month. It was August. As darkness fell over the side yard, she was summoned to bed by someone in the house. She had tried not to know or acknowledge any of them during this time of ripening. They were ethereal to her, and she protected the things that lasted. She did the same with the bulge, as it was full of guilt and regret and loss. She did turn the sense of loss into another form of feeling. It was compartmentalized in her psyche as a visceral sense. It was beyond what she saw, but it still held a vision. It was palpable. It felt like a pit in her stomach, then took on the faint smell of the tips of walking canes. The rubber tips she smelled in the front closet of her grandparents' house, mixed with the smell of old throw rugs. This smell then shifted to become a strong, sweet taste hanging from the sides of her tongue, with a slight burnt caramel that only Mrs. Butterworth's could offer. The sounds were only the kicking of the bulge, and its tiny heart beating twice as fast as her own. This all combined to build the sense of loss that she reveled in. This very sense would soon set her free. Startled by the second call to cajole her inside, she responded, "Yes, sister, I'll be right there." Issuing could not wait for this endless cycle to complete. and for her sense of loss to win over the monotony. The second chapter is called Little Olme. It wasn't easy communicating with people who could listen to anything. They took too much for granted and let every other sound escape their attention. Often, they were too busy making noise to listen. Olme had just recently realized this. It hadn't become clear for her until she had figured out how to make her own sounds. The click of tongue to teeth and the scoop of discs to roof of mouth were her basics. This world had just grown for her as she realized she could push her legs and pull her hands to scoot around the whitewashed pine floor of the little room she lived in. Things that had color talked most, although Olme had noticed the whispers of the grays and light browns were most exquisite. She could taste their color as they murmured their stories of the lonely, unforgotten spots. The rare visits that beings would make when their eyes would fall upon their space. Olme liked this best, and she felt appreciated and happy to visit these spaces of color. The whitewashed floorboards had several knotholes that felt like the sound of creased leather. These were the places she most pondered and wondered and wandered within. She would often wait for her morning feeding to be done so she could return to the party on the floor. Other than her bottle time, she saw no other person. Although she was still not walking, she had learned to cover the room from a snail view quite well. One morning after her feeding, she was startled to find another person like her own self presented to the room. She was Olme's size and, quite frankly, had Olme's smell. Only Olme noticed the slight bump of starch wafting from the girl's gown. With her eyes, she asked the girl's name and why she looked like the smell of starch. But the girl didn't notice her question and started to open her mouth while emitting very intense colors of red and yellow. It was as if the newcomer could shoot flowers from her mouth. Her name was Keeps, and she quickly established her dominance of Olme and the room. This was a time of trying, as Olme no longer had fragrant periods of time to visit her floorboard knots or to observe the taste of the glass windows as they melted. Keeps was always producing colors from her mouth, which were so bold and heavy that they hid the quieter senses of the room. Keeps was able to show Olme that she could observe things making a vibration without straining to do so. Olme suddenly realized that they were different. Olme wondered how such a strange creature had come to her. No one else of her size must be like Keeps. And that's it for this section of reading. Thank you for joining me. Dan Noyes, The Sound of the Shadow of Her Hands.